hundreds of Toyotas indoors in one of America's largest showrooms at Toyota of Hollywood on 441 between Hollywood and Sheridan. We love talking to this guy, the voice of the UFC. Jon Anik joins us there, as UFC 292 was a banger this weekend, and it seems like the UFC coronated a new star with Sean O'Malley's TKO win over Aljamain Sterling. John, always appreciate the time, man. Thank you.
Great to be with you guys. I went to a Titans-Patriots game, and, I couldn't drink the beer fast enough. The thing froze. It was the worst tailgate of my life. I spent it sitting in my Honda Civic. So I did 31 years in Massachusetts. I'm glad I'm in South Florida right now. Yeah, I would argue Sugar Sean O'Malley was probably metrically a top 5 pay-per-view star for the UFC before this weekend, which may be overstating it. But certainly now when you have the belt, it gives you the opportunity to hit a stratosphere that you would not otherwise be able to hit.
You guys are so smart with this, John, when it comes to UFC, because they even realize you guys never do this, where you have a guy, he wins the pay-per-view. Usually you always get the still shots because they want to I guess be fair to the pay-per-view customer. They put that puppy up on YouTube so quick because they're let's ride this Sean O'Malley thing to the moon. What do you think was the thinking of that? We got to hop even more on Sean O'Malley's star power here and send him to the moon.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And it was a decision by ESPN, our pay-per-view provider. The model changed when the ESPN deal started in 2019. So the UFC gets its nut no matter what, and ESPN can do something like this selectively. I'm sure for Aljamain Sterling, this isn't ideal that this is the time they choose to repurpose this to the entire world. But yeah, there have been a lot of strokes of genius. And even though I, as somebody who works for the UFC, was somewhat critical that this fight was happening on the challenger and not the champion's timeline, Sean O'Malley still has to go out and do it. And I just can't believe how many people, even Aljamain Sterling with respect, were underestimating this guy. The eye test for me says that this guy's an absolute sniper. He's super fast. The numbers suggest he's the most accurate, significant striker in the bantamweight division history. So I'm not sure anybody should be all that surprised that when he found an opening, he didn't miss.
Do you in any way feel for Aljo? Because I almost feel like he got more love in the loss than he had for his entire reign, which is kind of strange because, when he was doing what he was doing, he's beating the guys that he did. I didn't feel like he was getting the appreciation. Now everybody kind of feels like, oh, now you give flowers because, he was the bantamweight goat that Sean beat, but they didn't appreciate it while he was doing it.
Yeah, that's all fair. I think for Aljamain Sterling, he has this specific circumstance. He's the only guy in UFC history to win an undisputed title by disqualification. Still the only guy. May probably go down as the only guy, and that is just not going to do you any favors in the court of public opinion. I do hope that he sort of feels a little bit of that love because there's obviously been a lot of animosity. To say what you want about his charisma or lack thereof might be a little bit quirky, but he's a really good dude and well-intentioned guy. Grew up with next to no parental support and was very emotional in our fighter meeting this week. So that's kind of the way it goes, though, in mixed martial arts, especially when it comes to decision fights, right? If you win a close decision and the fan base doesn't think you deserve to, oftentimes a win can feel worse than a loss, right? But when you lose a fight and everybody thinks you won it, you're the king of the town. So it's hey man, it's a tough sport. I don't have to tell you guys,
You think we'll see that fight again, and this time people will kind of warm up to Aljamain a little bit more?
There are a lot of layers to it, my man, right? Aljamain Sterling is one of the best weight cutters in the sport, as Joe Rogan aptly said on the broadcast. So I don't know how many bantamweight cuts he still has left. As some of your listeners may know, his best friend, Merab Dvalishvili, is also the number one contender, which also causes things because I think Aljo would like to sort of get out of the way, win or lose, so that maybe Merab can have that opportunity. I can tell you, Aljo texted me yesterday. He's out for the rest of 2024. 23. So he's not going to fight till next year. He's not going to rematch Sugar Sean O'Malley in December. But yeah, if ever a bantamweight champion was worthy of an immediate rematch, it's Aljamain Sterling. I just don't think an immediate rematch is in the cards. I wouldn't be surprised if Aljo's next fight is Sean O'Malley if Sean can successfully defend, but I just don't think that's going to be the next fight for Sean, even though I think Sterling is richly deserving.
John, what was the atmosphere like as the win happens, as the crowd's going? How did Boston, I guess, take in that win?
So I'm from Boston, so perhaps my comments will be viewed through a lens of a lack of objectivity, right? But I learned a lesson to not try to compete with that crowd when I'm trying to cap a championship fight because they drowned me out for 5 or 6 seconds, and maybe the UFC in the future will be able to actually isolate that audio. But my goodness, I mean, it felt like a Celtics Game 7 in there. You know, it was just insane. I took the cans off for a second, and it was just deafening. But, of course, coming from a Boston guy, I'm sure a lot of South Florida sports fans are like, yeah, all right, you know, but it was insane. And the lesson for me as the broadcaster, especially with a loud crowd like that, is maybe just way to beat if you can. It's hard in the moment, right? I'm trying to cap history, but maybe way to beat and try to get in there because, man, it didn't take them much to shower me the heck out.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, John, and if we could divert for a second, we know you're objective because we got tipped off last week on WEEI about somebody. They were saying, oh, they'll take Mac Jones still over Tua, and I didn't know that the jumping off point was you. Yeah. And the jumping off point was apparently they were playing it on the morning show, and the jumping off point was, I guess, you were on one of the shows on EEI, and you apparently are not a Mac Jones guy. That you are rats off a ship on Mac Jones, which I understand, John. I mean, why wouldn't you be? But the idea that you are objective on your QBs, but the thing we were fascinated listening back to you is you actually have a quarterback list. You have made up a quarterback list.
I did, because these guys are trying to prevent me from ever calling an NFL football game in my life, throwing Mac Jones under the bus. And I knew that when I went in studio, they wanted to, talk about my supposed Mac Jones hatred. I'm just trying to call it like I see it. And certainly for your listenership, if you pull up a list of the NFL quarterbacks, even go pull up a fantasy football list, right, of rankings. It's not that far off in terms of where these guys actually rank. And other than maybe Sam Howell, and some of these rookies, there aren't that many guys that you would go into this season with, instead of Mac Jones. He's 27 or 28 in the league with respect. So, right. Yeah, you're blowing my mind that even somebody would talk about him in the same realm as Tua. I'm okay if, one New England fan wants to, through rose-colored glasses, suggest that Mac Jones is better than Daniel Jones. But he just does not pass the eye test for me. And I hope Mac Jones isn't a UFC fan. I'm so fearful he's going to show up octagon side, and I'm going to have to register an apology between fights.
Listen, you got to get Tua to a fight whenever you guys are coming back down. The guy's doing jiu-jitsu now. Everybody's like, doing the huge fall. Like we had Gilbert Burns on, and he's like, I'll teach him anytime, because Gilbert's apparently a rabid Dolphins fan now because his kids love Tyreek Hill. So he's like, I'll teach Tua whatever he needs to know so he doesn't get hurt. So he's now getting embraced by all the MMA community. You may have an in there.
That's great. Yeah, I heard Tua is trying to learn how to fall and incorporating some jiu-jitsu tendencies and training. That's great. We'd love to get Tua at a show. The NFL guys are kind of prohibitive, right? Because like even in Vegas in the summer, some of them can't necessarily do. But yeah, hopefully we can get him there during the off season, because I do think anyone who hasn't seen this stuff live, you go to one live event and then you get it.
If you don't see it live, TV doesn't do it justice. You got to get the atmosphere. You got to get everything, even the coming out when they come out. Like, oh, it's just awesome.
John, what do you make of the career right now of Ian Gary? His performance this weekend at against Neil Magny, I guess his persona that he's kind of getting into. Like, what do you think is the ceiling for this kid?
Championship. He's 25 years old. My podcast co-host Kenny Florian is not willing to say championship yet. I think there's so much connective tissue between Ian Gary and Sean O'Malley. I think the big difference maybe is that Ian Gary has an entire, albeit small, nation of Ireland behind him, and right now could just bang out arenas in Ireland like it's nothing. Not that Sean O'Malley couldn't, of course, but Ian Gary is a sponge. He listens, and even though there's all this bravado and there's this cockiness on his fighter bio, he lists a strength as his ego. He understands his ego. He has a wisdom that certainly, but there's a wisdom that belies his 25 years. This is a kid who grew up in Ireland during sort of the rise of Conor McGregor, and that's what got him to really take the next step. But he's got a good frame for the division. His head's a little bit small. Some people tell me his head's a little bit small, which maybe genetically isn't ideal in terms of long-term taking a shot. But he's going to establish roots in Brazil training camp. What's that?
Isn't a smaller head harder to hit?
Yeah, but it doesn't take much, right, to hit that to hit it right on the button, But he's still going to be in South Florida as his primary training camp, but he's going to establish roots in Brazil and not be living this nomadic lifestyle that he's been living of late. But he's a sniper on the feet, still untested on the ground. But I'm just as bullish on Ian Gary as I am on Sean O'Malley. It's just there's the speed and distance management. These guys are just next level strikers. And I would say Ian Gary already probably top 15 striker in the whole UFC.
Man, yeah, like when he mentioned the Wonder Boy thing, I was like, man, that I don't know if the fight will happen or not. I know Dana said that in Wonder Boy may not be keen on, but if it did happen, John, man, that's that one there is right. I mean, I couldn't even imagine how exciting that brawl would be.
Well, and Ian Gary will be favored, right? And people will be like, no, and it's like, yes, unequivocally, right? He opened minus 340 against Neil Magny, who stepped in on relatively short notice this past weekend, and minus 340 was gone in a blink. So Ian Gary's the real deal. And certainly Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is not the guy that's going to test him in the grappling realm. And Stephen Wonderboy Thompson's coming up on 40. This kid's 25, and he hasn't even arrived yet in his fighting prime. So most people, the handicap begins in that age column, and it's like 15 years between these guys. But we'll see. We'll see. There were some rumblings that maybe Wonderboy had some reluctance to accepting this fight, which they seemingly want to do in November, Madison Square Garden. So we'll see. But I think that fight makes just too much sense to not do.
Couple more before we get you out of here, John. I guess MSG is the rumored, I don't know if they've officially announced it, but the rumored date of Jon Jones and Stipe. I'm sure Stipe's going to be a monster underdog if that fight does happen. Would I be crazy to think that he could pull it off? Because I know John, he buzzsawed Cyril Gane, but like this is the heavyweight GOAT, and he doesn't really have a weakness other than this thing than age. Would you think he has the best chance of anybody that John's ever faced to beat him?
Yes, and it's probably not the play-by-play guy's job to tell you that Stipe is a live underdog, but the betting line is out, and I was very surprised to see, I think, something like plus 225. Maybe even north of that next to Stipe. I don't get it. He has come in at different weights relative to the challenge. It seems like he wants to – he had put on some weight for Francis Ngannou, and now I think he'll probably come in with that weight, that added muscle mass for the Jon Jones fight. But, yes, I mean, if anybody can do it, it is certainly Stipe. And I think if anybody is more committed to the cause on a day-to-day basis, despite his advanced age, if I can say that, it's Stipe, right? Jon Jones is out doing things. I mean, social media is a pretty good indicator, and it seems like Stipe has, quietly just been absolutely working and training and getting better. So I think Stipe has a great chance, and I'm just hoping the fight stays together, right? Sometimes I feel like it's ambitious for these guys like Jon Jones and Henry Cejudo. They're out for 3 years, and now all of a sudden they're going to fight, twice inside of 6 or 7 months. So I'm hopeful we get there, and Jon deserves to be the favorite. He's the greatest of all time, but yeah, Stipe's got a great shot.
And just before we get you out of here, John, the Conor thing, like it keeps going. He said on Twitter, he's like, oh, looks like it's not going to be this year. Then he comes out yesterday, December is back on the table. What do you make of all of this? The uncertainty, how Michael Chandler's got to be dealing with this, just when we get Conor back, and just like it feels like the goal line just kind of keeps moving on it.
Dude, I feel like Conor's getting a lot of unfair criticism in all of this. Chris Weidman had essentially the same injury, and he just came back a few nights ago, and his right leg, to me, sitting octagon side, respectfully looked atrophied and not at all ready to go. So whatever people want to sort of speculate as to what Conor McGregor is doing outside of the USADA pool to try to get healthy, this is a tremendously severe injury that there are regular human beings out there who suffer this injury 2 years later. They can't run, they can't jump, they can only barely walk, right? So yeah. I think we got to give the guy the benefit of the doubt. But now he seems ready to go. It'll be either December or January. I guess that's cautious optimism. It seems like over the last 24 hours, he said December's out. Now it's back on the table. We're inching closer. And again, I do believe the guy wants to be in an active competition cycle, but he has to go out and prove that. And he was in a good cycle when he was fighting Poirier, and then his leg snapped in two, and nobody seems to want to give him the benefit of the doubt. So I'm hopeful that we'll see him a few times next year.
Isn't this his own doing, though? Because I think we'd be more patient with a lot of other fighters just based on their history and how they go about things. And because Conor is Conor, good and bad, right? He doesn't necessarily always get the benefit of the doubt or the things that you're talking about, because I do realize it's a serious injury.
Yes, but there are also things that work against him, right? Like during COVID, my man, they weren't going to trot Conor McGregor out at the UFC Apex, right?
Got you.
Can you imagine Conor walking out at the Apex? He wanted to fight. He wanted to fight during COVID-19. I mean, could you imagine a superstar like that in his prime with no crowd at the Apex? It wasn't going to happen. So yes, of course he has done things that have made his active competition cycle, not what we all thought it would be. But when he did return, I think he did with clear intentions against Poirier when they fought twice a couple of years ago to make a concerted effort at a world championship. And yeah, I don't love that maybe he's trying to position himself for a BMF belt, right? I think a talent on Conor's level should be chasing undisputed greatness still, right? In terms of really trying to cement your MMA legacy. No one's suggesting he's going to be a Mount Rushmore guy pound for pound, but the guy's got one lightweight win, right? That's his best weight class. He has one UFC lightweight win when he beat Eddie Alvarez for the title, and that's it. So you're not wrong. But I do think some things work against the superstars that aren't brought to light too.
Jon, we always appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jon.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you guys.